Hello, today we are embarking on a journey into one of history's most enduring mysteries. To truly grasp the audacity of the events of November 24, 1971, we must first immerse ourselves in the fabric of that time. The United States was a nation deeply scarred by the Vietnam War. The evening news was a nightly broadcast of distant conflict and domestic unrest. The counterculture movement had shaken the foundations of the establishment, and a pervasive sense of disillusionment hung in the air. It was the golden age of hijacking, where between 1968 and 1972, over 130 aircraft were commandeered, often to Cuba, making skyjacking a bizarrely common headline. Airports were open, security was virtually non-existent, you could arrive minutes before a flight and walk straight onto the plane. It was into this world of both boundless possibility and profound anxiety that a man, a specter in a business suit, stepped into the Portland International Airport on the rainy Wednesday before Thanksgiving. He was about to exploit this lax security in a way no one had ever imagined, crafting a legend that would outlive the era itself. His entry into history was as unassuming as his appearance. At the Northwest Orient ticket counter, he presented himself as Dan Cooper. The name, borrowed from a Belgian comic book series about a Canadian Royal Air Force officer, was a piece of quiet, obscure irony. The ticket agent, Hal Williams, later recalled nothing remarkable about him. He was a man in his mid-40s, standing between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 feet 0 inches with a weight of around 170 to 180 pounds. He possessed a narrow, angular face, a strong jaw, and brown, deep-set eyes that held a calm, almost detached intensity. His uniform was that of 1,000 mid-level businessmen, a crisp, white JCPenney shirt, a narrow, black JCPenney clip-on tie, a dark, single-breasted business suit, and polished black loafers. The only hint of anything beyond the ordinary was the pair of mother-of-pearl cufflinks that fastened his sleeves. He carried a black, leather attaché case, which he would never let leave his side. He paid for his one-way ticket to Seattle, a mere $20, with cash, and accepted his boarding pass for seat 18C. As he turned and walked towards the gate, he dissolved into the crowd. He was, in every conceivable way, a ghost, perfectly crafted for the anonymity he was about to exploit. Northwest Orient Flight 305, a Boeing 727-100, lifted off from runway 28L at 2:50 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The flight was so short that the no smoking sign had barely been turned off. The cabin held 36 passengers and 6 crew members, a typical load for the holiday eve. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner, young and experienced, took her seat in the rear jump seat, directly across from the man in 18C. As she settled, he gestured to her. She leaned in, and he handed her a folded white envelope. Assuming it was a phone number, a common occurrence for the attractive stewardesses of the era, she smiled politely and tucked it into her skirt pocket without a second thought. But the man, Dan Cooper, was not to be ignored. He leaned closer, the scent of his aftershave mixing with the stale cabin air. His voice was a low, firm whisper, devoid of panic or aggression, but carrying an undeniable weight of truth. "Miss," he said, his eyes locking with hers, "you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The world inside that aircraft instantly shrank. The mundane sounds of the cabin, the hum of the engines, the chatter of passengers, faded into a distant roar. The note, when she unfolded it with trembling hands, was blunt. It claimed that the briefcase he carried contained a bomb and laid out his demands. The carefully constructed normalcy of Flight 305 had just been utterly dismantled. Florence Schaffner's training kicked in. Masking her terror with a professional calm, she immediately went to the interphone at the rear of the cabin and called the cockpit. Captain William Bill Scott, a veteran pilot, received the news with a cold dread. Cooper's demands, relayed through Schaffner, were not the rantings of a madman but the precise instructions of a meticulous planner. He wanted $200,000, a king's ransom, equivalent to over $1.5 million today. But it wasn't just the amount, it was the specificity. The money was to be in negotiable American currency, all unmarked $20 bills, and used. This was a critical detail, designed to make the money untraceable in circulation. Furthermore, he demanded 4 parachutes. Not just any parachutes, he asked for 2 primary back parachutes and 2 emergency front packs, also known as chest reserves. This technical nuance was the first major clue that they were not dealing with a novice. This was someone who understood aerial egress, someone who knew that a reserve chute could be the difference between life and death. The final condition was a masterstroke of tactical negotiation. Upon landing in Seattle, the money and parachutes would be delivered, and in exchange, the 36 passengers would be released. The crew, however, would remain. This ensured the airline and authorities would comply, while also giving Cooper the human shields he needed for the next, unprecedented phase of his plan. As Flight 305 entered a holding pattern over the dark, rain-lashed waters of Puget Sound, a dual drama unfolded. In the cockpit, Captain Scott maintained a calm, professional dialogue with Cooper, reassuring him that his demands were being met, all while secretly communicating the grave reality to air traffic control. On the ground, Seattle-Tacoma Airport became the nerve center of a frantic, high-stakes operation. The FBI, led by Special Agent Ralph Himmelsbach, a tenacious and methodical investigator, scrambled to assemble the ransom. They raided bank vaults for used $20 bills, meticulously recording the serial numbers of each one, 10,000 bills in total, a process that felt both crucial and hopelessly optimistic. Meanwhile, the U.S. Army provided parachutes from Fort Lewis, a mix of operational and training chutes, as per Cooper's demand. The runway was isolated, its perimeter secretly lined with FBI sharpshooters who peered through high-powered scopes, their crosshairs scanning the aircraft's windows for any clear shot that never came. Inside the plane, Cooper remained an island of calm. He ordered a second bourbon and soda. This time, it was provided by the airline, and lit a cigarette, the smoke curling placidly in the tense, enclosed air. He was not a frantic terrorist, he was a man waiting for a business transaction to be completed. At 5:39 p.m., Flight 305 finally touched down at Seattle-Tacoma. It was directed to a remote, dimly lit section of the tarmac, far from the terminal and any prying eyes. The scene was surreal, almost theatrical. An airport utility truck, its yellow light rotating, drove slowly out to the waiting jet. An airline employee, following explicit instructions, transferred the heavy knapsack of cash and the bundle of parachutes onto the rear air stairs, which Cooper had ordered to be lowered. This was the first critical test of his plan, receiving the goods without being captured. With the ransom now aboard, the next phase of his humanitarian ploy unfolded. The flight attendants, demonstrating incredible courage and presence of mind, negotiated the release of the passengers. They argued that with the money and parachute secured, there was no further need to hold the innocent travelers. Cooper, consistent in his calm rationality, agreed. The forward door was opened, and the 36 passengers, bewildered but relieved, hurried down the steps into the cold rain and onto waiting buses, completely unaware of the identity of the man who had held them hostage. They left behind a hollowed-out aircraft, a crew of 4, and one of the most enigmatic criminals in history. With the passengers gone, the atmosphere shifted from a hostage situation to a tactical mission. Cooper's focus was now entirely on the aircraft and its configuration. He ordered the plane to be refueled for the next leg to Mexico City. But this routine procedure became an agonizing, 90-minute delay. The refueling truck had compatibility issues with the 727's port, a variable Cooper hadn't anticipated. Yet, he displayed no signs of panic. He used this time to meticulously inspect the parachutes, running his hands over the nylon canopies and the metal buckles of the harnesses with the practiced eye of a connoisseur. He had the crew lower the rear air stair slightly to verify its operation. Most tellingly, he engaged Captain Scott in a technical discussion, asking specific questions about the plane's indicated airspeed, flap settings, and the best configuration for a low-altitude, slow-speed flight. He was not just a hijacker, he was a pilot, a skydiver, a planner. He was preparing his escape vehicle. At 7:36 p.m., its tanks finally full, Flight 305 took off once more, this time on a southeasterly heading towards Reno, its first refueling stop on the way to Mexico. But its true destination was a single, specific point in the sky. Cooper's instructions were precise: fly at a mere 10,000 feet, with the landing gear down, the wing flaps lowered to 15 degrees, and the rear staircase deployed. This created a slow, stable platform perfect for a jump, but a fuel-inefficient and uncomfortable way to fly. More critically, he insisted the cabin remain unpressurized. This was a masterstroke. It prevented a catastrophic explosive decompression when the door was opened and eliminated the risk of being sucked out violently. It showed an intimate knowledge of the 727 systems. As the plane climbed into the storm, it was engulfed by turbulence. Rain lashed the windows, and the aircraft shuddered. The temperature inside plummeted. The crew, shivering in the thin, cold air at 10,000 feet, put on their oxygen masks. In the cabin, illuminated by the dim, eerie glow of emergency lights, D.B. Cooper was alone with the 4 parachutes and a bag containing $200,000. He was preparing to jump into one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth, the mountainous, forested, and rain-swollen landscape of southwestern Washington. At approximately 8 p.m., somewhere between Portland and Seattle, over the rugged terrain near the Lewis River, a warning light illuminated on the cockpit instrument panel. It was the stairs light, indicating a change in the configuration of the rear air stairs. Moments later, the crew felt a distinct, soft bump, a shudder that was different from the turbulence. The plane seemed to lift slightly, as if relieved of a weight. Captain Scott waited a few minutes, then cautiously called back on the interphone. "Everything okay back there?" There was only silence. He called again. Nothing. Flight engineer Anderson ventured out of the cockpit, peering through the peephole in the reinforced door. He reported what they had already suspected: the cabin was empty. The rear stairwell was down, swaying in the slipstream. D.B. Cooper, his parachute deployed or not, his fate sealed or just beginning, had vanished. He had stepped off into a 200-knot wind, a freezing rain, and a blackness so complete it was like jumping into a void. The greatest mystery in aviation history was now airborne. The remainder of the flight to Reno was tense and surreal. The crew, alone in a machine that had been the instrument of an unprecedented crime, flew on, following Cooper's original flight plan because they had no other instructions. They landed in Reno at 10:15 p.m. The plane was immediately surrounded by a swarm of FBI agents and police cars, their lights painting the fuselage in flashes of red and blue. Agents, their weapons drawn, stormed up the still-lowered rear stairs, expecting a confrontation. Instead, they found a chilling scene. The cabin was cold and empty. The 2 remaining parachutes, one of them, a reserve, had been deliberately tangled and left behind, a possible act of misdirection or a sign that he knew exactly which equipment to trust lay on the seats. On 18C, they found Cooper's black clip-on tie. The bomb was a fake, the red cylinders were road flares, the wires disconnected. He had bluffed his way to $200,000 and then performed a disappearing act that would baffle the world for decades. The only tangible clues were the tie, the parachutes, and the knowledge that he had jumped into a needle-in-a-haystack search area. At first light on November 25, the largest and most extensive land search in U.S. history was launched. The FBI, aided by local sheriffs, the U.S. Army, and civilian volunteers, descended upon the predicted drop zone in southwestern Washington. The area was a nightmare for searchers, a vast, trackless expanse of dense Pacific Northwest rainforest, steep ravines, thick undergrowth, and muddy, swollen creeks. Helicopters thumped overhead, their crews scanning the impenetrable canopy for any sign of a torn parachute or a body. Search parties on foot, armed with maps and radios, fought their way through the soggy wilderness, their boots sinking into deep mud. They searched for weeks, then months. They found nothing. No body, no parachute fragments, no shred of clothing, and crucially, no money. It was as if the forest had simply absorbed D.B. Cooper. The sheer scale of the terrain, combined with the terrible weather conditions on the night of the jump, led many to the initial conclusion that he could not have survived. But if he died, where was the evidence? For years, the case grew cold, transitioning from an active investigation to an American legend. Then, on a sunny afternoon in February 1980, over 8 years after the hijacking, a family picnicking on the banks of the Columbia River in Vancouver, Washington, made a discovery that reignited the mystery. 8-year-old Brian Ingram, while building a campfire, reached into the sandy riverbank and felt something odd. He dug it up, 3 packets of decomposing $20 bills, bound with rubber bands that had mostly rotted away. In total, $5,800 of D.B. Cooper's ransom had been found. The FBI confirmed the serial numbers were a match. This discovery was a bombshell. It proved, almost conclusively, that Cooper had survived the jump at least long enough to handle the money. The prevailing theory was that the cash had washed into the Columbia from one of its tributaries, perhaps the Washogo River, which flowed through the primary search area. But it created more questions than it answered. Why was only this small amount found? Did the rest of the money disintegrate? Was it buried elsewhere? Or did Cooper, injured or pursued, have to abandon most of his loot? The river had given up a tantalizing clue, but it guarded its ultimate secret fiercely. In the immediate aftermath, the FBI was flooded with thousands of tips. The public was captivated, and everyone seemed to know someone who fit the description. The first significant suspect was a man named John List, who had murdered his family just weeks before the hijacking. He was the right age and build, but was eventually ruled out. Another early suspect was a man named Richard Floyd McCoy, whose story we will explore in depth later. The FBI painstakingly followed every lead, from the plausible to the absurd, creating a massive wall of potential suspects, each with their own motives and alibis. It was like searching for a single, specific ghost in a nation of 200 million people. The only physical evidence left behind was Cooper's black clip-on tie and the 2 remaining parachutes. The tie, a J.C. Penney model, was subjected to every forensic test available in the 1970s. In 2022, advanced DNA analysis would even be conducted, revealing partial genetic profiles, but no definitive match. The parachutes became a story in themselves. One, a Navy-backed pilot survival parachute, was functional. The other, an older training chute, had been deliberately tangled by Cooper, a possible act of misdirection to ensure he was given the best equipment. Forensic analysis of the parachutes revealed minuscule traces of pollen and a rare metal called titanium, but these clues only added more layers to the mystery rather than solving it. As years turned into decades, the FBI periodically re-interviewed the flight attendants and passengers. Memories faded and details became conflated. Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow remained the primary sources, but their stories, while consistent on the main events, sometimes differed on small details. What color were his eyes? Exactly what did he say? Some passengers came forward with new theories or recollections, but no single memory provided the breakthrough clue. The human element of the investigation was slowly, inevitably, fading away, making the mystery even more impervious to solving. One of the strongest theories to emerge was that Cooper was an experienced skydiver, possibly ex-military. His specific demand for 4 parachutes showed he understood the need for a backup. His choice of the NB-8 back parachute, the best one available, and his rejection of the tangled training chute, pointed to expertise. His calmness in the face of a dangerous night jump into a storm over treacherous terrain suggested a level of experience that went far beyond a novice. Investigators theorized he may have been a member of a skydiving club or a former paratrooper, someone who knew the risks and had the skill to mitigate them. The counter-theory was simple: Cooper did not survive the jump. Proponents pointed to the horrific conditions: freezing temperatures, 200 miles per hour winds, rain, and a pitch-black landing zone filled with 100-foot-tall fir trees and jagged terrain. They argued that no one, not even an expert, could have survived such a leap. The fact that none of the money except for the 3 packets ever surfaced was cited as evidence that the rest of the cash was lost with him, buried deep in a remote ravine or at the bottom of a river. This theory posits that the answer to the mystery has always been there, waiting in the silent woods, a skeleton with a rotting bag of cash. As the official investigation waned, the case was kept alive by a dedicated group of amateur sleuths, journalists, and obsessed citizens. These individuals, like author Jeffrey Gray or the late researcher Bernie Rhodes, spent years, sometimes decades, poring over case files, interviewing witnesses, and developing their own theories. They formed a unique community, sharing findings online and at conventions. While they often clashed with the FBI and each other, their passion ensured that the D.B. Cooper case never faded from public memory. They proved that sometimes, the most enduring investigations are not conducted by agencies, but by the curious public. An enduring irony of the case is the hijacker's famous name. He bought his ticket as Dan Cooper. However, in the initial rush of news reporting, a wire service reporter misheard the name as D.B. Cooper. The error was printed in hundreds of newspapers and became permanently etched into the public consciousness. The real Dan Cooper was a forgotten Belgian comic book character, a Canadian Air Force officer, while D.B. Cooper became an American folk legend. It was the first of many misunderstandings and red herrings that would come to define the case. Over the decades, the FBI's own leading theory evolved. Initially, they believed he was a seasoned criminal with skydiving experience. After the money was found in 1980, the theory shifted to acknowledge he likely survived the jump, at least initially. In later years, some agents leaned towards the idea that he was a lone wolf, an intelligent and meticulous planner who may have been an out-of-work aerospace employee or engineer, given his knowledge of the 727. The official stance upon closing the case was one of agnosticism. They had no conclusive proof of his fate or his identity, a testament to the perfection of his crime. While the world was fascinated by the mystery, for the crew of Flight 305, it was a traumatic life event. They were hailed as heroes for their calmness under pressure, but they also had to live with the psychological aftermath of being at the center of a prolonged, high-stakes crime. Captain William Scott, First Officer Bill Radazak, Flight Engineer H.A. Anderson, and flight attendants Tina Mucklow and Florence Schaffner carried the memory with them for the rest of their lives. They gave countless interviews, each time reliving those tense hours. For them, D.B. Cooper was not a legend, he was a real, frightening presence who had hijacked their lives along with their airplane. Cooper's success inspired a brief, bizarre wave of copycat hijackings. In 1972, there were several attempts where hijackers demanded money in parachutes. Some, like Richard McCoy, were successful in the short term. Others were comically inept, ending in swift capture. These copycats proved two things: first, that Cooper's method was seen as a viable blueprint, and second, that it was much harder to pull off than he had made it look. The authorities were now on high alert, and the new security measures made successful replication nearly impossible. Cooper's crime was a one-of-a-kind event, a perfect storm of opportunity, planning, and audacity that could never be repeated. From day one, the media played a crucial role in shaping the D.B. Cooper legend. The story had everything: mystery, high stakes, a seemingly polite criminal, and a dramatic disappearance. Newspapers, TV networks, and magazines splashed the story across their front pages and led their broadcasts. They gave him the misnamed DB moniker and helped frame him as a folk hero, a Robin Hood of the skies, even though he stole from a corporation and not the rich to give to the poor. The media's relentless coverage ensured that the case remained in the public eye, transforming a criminal act into a national obsession and, ultimately, an American myth. The Boeing 727, the star of this drama, itself faded into history. Its unique rear air stair, the key to Cooper's escape, was eventually sealed on most models. The aircraft, once a workhorse of the commercial fleet, was phased out in favor of more efficient jets. The final passenger flight of a 727 in the United States occurred in 2019. The retirement of the 727 symbolically closed a chapter. It marked the end of the type of aircraft that made the Cooper hijacking possible, a final, tangible connection to that November night in 1971. The tool of the crime was now a museum piece. With no physical evidence beyond a tie and a few parachutes, the hunt for D.B. Cooper became a hunt for a name to match the face. The FBI's composite sketch, based on witness descriptions, became an icon. It depicted a man in his mid-40s with a narrow face, a strong jaw, and piercing, deep-set eyes. Yet, this sketch was a consensus of trauma-filtered memories, a phantom's portrait. Witnesses disagreed on crucial details. Was his hair black or dark brown? Did he wear sunglasses? Was his complexion olive or pale? The sketch was a starting point that would lead to over 800 serious suspects over the decades, each one a potential solution to the puzzle, each one eventually leaving investigators with more questions than answers. One of the most compelling early suspects was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., a decorated Army Green Beret and skilled helicopter pilot, an avid skydiver, and a devout Mormon Sunday school teacher. McCoy was a complex figure. Just 4 months after the Cooper hijacking, he orchestrated a stunningly similar crime, hijacking a United Airlines flight and escaping with $500,000 by parachute. He was captured days later, convicted, and famously escaped prison before being killed in a shootout. The parallels were undeniable, but the differences were telling. McCoy's hijacking was more aggressive, he brandished a handgun and a fake grenade. He was also younger, at 29, and more athletic than the description of Cooper. While the FBI initially considered him a top suspect, they eventually ruled him out, citing alibi evidence and the subtle but distinct differences in modus operandi. The ghost of Cooper, it seemed, had inspired a copycat, but was not the man himself. Perhaps no suspect fits the profile of the quiet, knowledgeable hijacker better than Kenneth Christensen. A former World War II Army paratrooper, he had spent years working for Northwest Orient Airlines as a flight steward and purser. He knew the Boeing 727's rear staircase intimately. He was the right age, had a similar build, and bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch. In his later years, he was a heavy smoker, drank bourbon, and made cryptic, unsettling comments to his brother, saying he knew where he could get a lot of money and that he had a secret. Most intriguingly, shortly after the hijacking, he paid cash for a $20,000 plot of land. Despite these compelling circumstantial threads, no direct evidence ever linked him to the crime. Was Kenneth Christensen a disgruntled employee who used his insider knowledge to pull off the ultimate heist? Or is he just another piece of intriguing that fits neatly into the vast Cooper mythology? In the realm of high-intrigue suspects, few are as captivating as Robert Rackstraw. A former Army helicopter pilot with advanced parachuting training, Rackstraw had a history of fraud, embezzlement, and a mysterious past that included ties to covert operations. He bore a resemblance to age-progressed versions of the Cooper sketch and had the necessary skills. He was even briefly a suspect in the 1970s before being dropped due to lack of evidence. The case was reopened in 2016 by a team of private investigators, who pointed to encrypted messages, a history of using aliases, and his specific skill set as evidence. However, the FBI remained unconvinced, stating the evidence was purely circumstantial. Rackstraw himself vehemently denied involvement until his death. He represents the tantalizing possibility of Cooper as a sophisticated, intelligence-linked operative, a chameleon who used his training to vanish forever. On July 8, 2016, after 45 years of investigation, thousands of leads, and countless man-hours, the FBI made a historic announcement. They were officially transferring the D.B. Cooper case to their inactive vault. The reason was pragmatic: resources were needed for current, solvable crimes. Yet, in suspending the active hunt, the Bureau inadvertently performed the final act in the creation of a folk hero. Cooper was no longer just a criminal, he was a permanent enigma. He had beaten the system. The case file, 60 volumes thick, was closed, but the legend was now forever open to the world's imagination. He became a symbol of the ultimate escape, a rogue who dared the impossible and won. D.B. Cooper transcended true crime to become a staple of American pop culture. His story has been told in dozens of books, documentaries, and even a feature film, The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper. He inspired an episode of Prison Break, songs by bands like Chuck Berry and My Chemical Romance, and even a line of craft beers. In the town of Ariel, Washington, near the suspected drop zone, Cooper Con is held annually, a festival where enthusiasts, researchers, and the curious gather to celebrate the mystery. In a nation often disillusioned with authority, Cooper was reframed as an anti-hero, a quiet, non-violent man who outsmarted the giants of corporate aviation and federal law enforcement. He was the ultimate underdog. While Cooper's personal fate remains a mystery, his impact on the world is concrete and visible every single day. The hijacking was a seismic shock to the aviation industry. It directly led to the implementation of universal mandatory passenger screening. The metal detector, once a rare sight, became a permanent fixture at every airport gate. The era of walking freely onto a plane ended. The FAA created the Cooper Task Force, which developed the Cooper Vane, a mechanical device that prevents the rear air stairs of a 727 from being lowered in flight. His crime ushered in the modern age of aviation security, creating the complex, sometimes frustrating, but undeniably safer system we know today. Every time you empty your pockets at a security checkpoint, you are encountering the lasting legacy of D.B. Cooper. So, we are left where we began, with an enduring mystery. The questions echo through the decades. Did he survive? Did he perish in the jump, his body and the remaining $194,200 still hidden in the deep woods, waiting for the slow work of nature to reveal its secret? Or did he succeed, living out a quiet, anonymous life, the story of his great heist his alone to cherish? The evidence is fragmentary, the theories are contradictory, and the only certainty is the captivating power of the unknown. D.B. Cooper is no longer a man, but a mirror. He reflects our fascination with the perfect crime, our admiration for the lone wolf, and our enduring hope that in a world of constant surveillance, it is still possible to simply vanish. The case is closed. The legend is forever open.